for coming, and I apologise for the late time change. I was trying to schedule this over lunch. That seemed to be the most popular time. I know it's not suitable for everyone. So if you have other parents, coaches, club members that you think might benefit from this, please go back, tell them what you heard today, and as I said before, check their website for the video of this session. But first of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Melissa Hopwood. I am the relatively new National Pathway Manager for Australian Canoeing. So the purpose of today, introduce myself, tell you what Pathways means, what we're working on. So it's got to be quite brief. We're really going to skim the surface, so I imagine there might be some questions that arise at the end of the session. Hopefully we have time. I am happy to answer questions either in here in the room afterwards, if you see me out in the stands, and I've also got my email address up here later as well, so happy for you to contact me at any time. So first things first, what is Pathways all about? This is kind of a new catchphrase that's popping up in Australian sport, but it's a little bit vague. What exactly does it mean? So really what I want to talk about today is what is it we're trying to achieve in Pathways? What is Pathways? How are we going to achieve our goals, and how will we know if we're successful? So ultimately, overall, what we're trying to achieve is to go from the picture at the top to the picture in the bottom more effectively, more efficiently, and more often. That's also quite a vague statement, so we need to firm that up a little bit. Exactly how do we do that? And to understand how we do that, we actually need to go to the top. And late 2012, some of you may be aware, the Australian Institute of Sport released Australia's Winning Edge, which is the performance plan for 2012 to 2020 and beyond. So the AIS set some performance targets that they set National Sporting Organisation the goal of achieving. And so those performance targets were to be ranked top 5 at the Olympics and Paralympics in Rio 2016 and Tokyo 2020. To be the #1 ranked nation in the Commonwealth Games, top 15 Winter Olympics and Winter Paralympics, and to produce 20+ world championships annually, annually. So it's these top 5 Olympics and Paralympics and 20+ world champions annually that are really the crux of the operations of AC. So from these goals, AC then went back and said, okay, how can we contribute to these? And Australian Canoeing developed some winning edge targets. And so again, these are around high performance, and I understand this is a little bit hard to see, but what we've got here is Australian Canoeing have actually gone through and set some medal targets for major events, World Championships and Olympic Games, right through to the Olympics in 2020. And these are senior national medal targets. So we've got targets for canoe sprint, we've got targets for canoe slalom, and we've got para-canoe targets. What does this mean for Pathways? Is that we need to put some plans in place, we need to get some action happening to make sure that we have athletes and coaches in our system that are capable of delivering these targets in 2016, and more importantly perhaps for the Pathways role, in 2020. How can we sustain this? So at present our goal for 2020 is in canoe sprint 2 gold medals, 3 silver or bronze medals, and then 4 other competitors who don't necessarily medal. So how do we get there? And so from that, what we're now working on is we're extrapolating that down and we're developing some pathway targets so that we have specific performance indicators. Just as the AIS has, just as AC has from a performance perspective, we need to set some specific targets for pathway activities. So we're talking Olympic Hopes athletes, we're talking under 18s, we're talking under 23s, and we're also talking about increasing participation right at the bottom end, because the more athletes we have in boats, the more competition we have pressing for these high performance spots, the better competitive culture we get. So I don't have any specific pathway targets to share with you right now, but this is something we're working on, and the kinds of targets that we're looking at are identifying some specific international benchmark standards for times. What does it take to get in the finals at a junior world championships? What kind of times do we need for each of the events? And how many athletes do we need reaching those times in our pathway so that we have fighting for spots on teams, so that we have really great depth of athletes in our pathway who are pushing the envelope internationally? So when we have these performance standards, it's about benchmark standards and times. It's about the number of athletes that are achieving those benchmarks. It's about the number of athletes pushing them up underneath it. And in order to do that, it's about improving the quality of the daily training environment. Through access to support staff, through access to high quality coaching, we're very much about building the athlete environment to achieve these performance standards. And these pathway targets, we will publish. We're not going to keep them to ourselves. We will make sure that every coach, every parent, every athlete understands what our objectives are so that you can better understand why we're making certain decisions, why we're targeting particular regions, why we're targeting particular events. So once we set those standards, we've got to figure out what's the best way to get there. How can we most effectively achieve those targets? And so this is really where the activity of the pathway manager comes into place. So first and foremost, to achieve targets, we need a cooperative, effective team. So Australian Canoeing has hired my position as National Pathway Manager. This is actually now a requirement from the Australian Institute of Sport. To receive your Winning Edge funding, you must recruit a National Pathway Manager. The AIS recognises that as much as we want you to get 20 plus, as a country we want 20 plus world champions a year, we want top 5 Olympics, we've got to make sure this pathway is sustainable. So you need a pathway manager. To support me, to be the face of athlete development and coach development in each state, we are currently recruiting a team of regional pathway coordinators. And so these people, in some cases, will have dual roles. So they might be a pathway coach as well as a pathway coordinator. They might be a team manager as well as a pathway coordinator. It's shaping up differently in each state, but we're currently recruiting. We've advertised for South Australia and Queensland at the moment to begin with. We've got some thoughts in motion, some inquiries going in WA, and some ideas about New South Wales as well at this stage. Ultimately, we plan to have one in every state. And these people are responsible for interacting with the clubs, interacting with the coaches, upskilling the coaches, making sure that we're doing talent identification initiatives and participation drives to increase our membership. And as I said, increase that body moving forward. So we've got a team of people working together towards these goals. And I know that sometimes clubs feel a little bit left out of the communication. Clubs feel a little bit left out of the equation, a little bit left out of the story. This is what we are here to do. We're here to include you in the process, to get your input and to help you contribute to the high performance pathway. So we've got the team in place, we've got the staff there. Another focus is athletes, obviously. We can't achieve those targets without the athletes. And so the key pathway activities that we're working on at the moment are to publicise, to develop and make public our Olympic athlete pathway. And so this is a statement of the typical progression of involvement in canoe kayak from your very first time you jump in a boat right up to winning multiple Olympic medals. It's a developmental pathway, a progression through the different stages of skill development. And so this pathway framework will outline what those stages are, what it means for canoeing in terms of what do athletes look like at each of these stages, what are the requirements to progress to a next level, what daily training environment, what the daily training environment should look like, for athletes at each of these levels, and what kind of support athletes get at each of the levels. So again, it's very clear what's required to progress up the pathway. This is also a requirement of the Australian Institute of Sport. We must have this because they say it's important for the community to understand the high performance pathway and what it takes to get there and where everyone sits in that pathway. From a pathways perspective, a very important component of athlete development is the National Elite Development Program, which some of you are involved in. I understand that there has been very little communication and very little support for the NADP over the last 12 to 18 months. We haven't had a manager driving that position for a while because we had some movement of staff, but I'm coming in now, and between myself and the regional coordinators, the management of the NADP will improve. We're getting there. We're still planning how to revamp and refresh the program because it hasn't been touched for a little while. It's pretty good as it is, but I think we can be a little bit more effective, and I think we can be clearer on what it means to be an NADP athlete and what to expect as an NADP athlete and what support the programs can provide. So this is something that's a real priority for us to get this right, to help athletes who are on emerging into Olympic hopes teams, junior national teams and under 23s. We have also currently in the process, we're very close to signing off on our new partnership with Surf Lifesaving Australia and the Next Wave. Again, I know there has been a lack of communication around Next Wave program in the last 12 to 18 months because we didn't have a manager driving it, and Surf Lifesaving also didn't have a manager driving Next Wave for about 12 months or so. Both organisations now have a pathway manager in place. We're improving this. We've got new guidelines for selection criteria for athlete ambassadors and a new program of support for athlete ambassadors. We're working on a squad structure so that Surf Lifesaving Australia will contribute directly to programs and squads that are integral to our connection between the surf lifesaving community and the canoe high performance programs so that athletes are better supported to participate in both sports. So we're working on this. And the other thing that I find really exciting that we're working on, which is at the lower end of the pathway in terms of fundamental paddling skills and bringing new athletes into the sport, is the Paddle Passport program. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with it, but we're adapting a very successful program from the British Canoe Union that's essentially a kind of a basic skills award scheme where we can easily provide coaches, upskill coaches, and provide them with a little bit of a coaching manual of these are appropriate progressions to prepare athletes for involvement in competitive racing. And it's discipline generic. The athletes get exposed to slalom skills, to sprint skills, to the idea of longer distance marathon type racing, but it's fun. And so we're looking at branding up this program and disseminating it nationally so that we have a really solid, essentially won't be this big, but it's the equivalent of an Oz kick or a net set go, something like that for canoeing to make the sport a little bit more accessible for new athletes. So that's what we're focusing on to improve the athlete side of the pathway. But we also know that athletes can go nowhere without their coaches. And coach development traditionally hasn't been such an area of priority for Australian canoeing. But now, with the focus on the pathway, coaches are very much a priority for us. So similar to the National Athlete Pathway Framework that I mentioned that very clearly states the stages of development for athletes and the opportunities that are available for athletes and what's required to progress, we're also working on producing a coach pathway. So it's very clear for interested coaches how they get into the sport, what they need to do in terms of professional development to progress up to the next level of coaching, what certifications they are required to coach athletes at different stages of the athlete pathway. So that's in preparation at the moment. And alongside that, we're updating our Level 1, Level 2 coaching curriculum. I know there are a lot of people who have been putting their hands up saying, I want to do my Level 1, I want to do my Level 2. I've put my paperwork in for reassessment and I haven't heard back. I apologise for that. We're getting there. We're working on this new curriculum. We're working on new ideas for how we can offer professional development for coaches that are outside of this formal Level 1, Level 2. You might have your Level 1, you might have your Level 2, but we might invite you along and do a half a day or a 4-hour course on water to upskill you in starts, for example. Have little learning modules. We might have some sports science modules if you want to learn about nutrition. So we're working on some ideas about professional development opportunities for you as coaches. Moving a little bit further up the coach development pathway, we're trialling just this week a new coach mentoring program where we have up-and-coming coaches who are working with some really promising looking athletes but aren't necessarily getting a lot of support or don't necessarily have a State Institute of Sport program that they can watch on what the coach is doing and get some advice from a coach nearby. So what we're looking at doing is integrating and having coaches in this position actually come and visit a State Institute of Sport program or the national set with the national team coaches and work with our high performance network of coaches so that you can see how they operate in their coaching environment, so you can ask some questions, so the high performance coaches can watch you in action and provide a little bit of feedback of what you're doing really well, where you might have some areas of improvement and where you might have some opportunities to grow and develop. So that's something really exciting. And at the top level for our high performance coaches, we have, if I do the numbers, it's probably about, I would say 70 to 80% of our high performance coaching staff, potentially even more, who are involved in AIS Centre for Performance Coaching and Leadership programs. These programs are run by organisations such as the Melbourne Business School, the National Institute of Dramatic Arts, to upskill coaches on aspects of coaching that are not necessarily technical. So things like communication, decision making, organisational skills, mental health, all these different aspects that are part and parcel of the coaching process that coaches have great technical knowledge, but sometimes need a little bit of assistance in all the other roles that are involved in coaching. And so there are some 2-year intensive programs that, of our sprint coaches here, we've got 1, 2, 3, I think we've got about 4 coaches involved in these 2-year intensive programs at one stage or another. We also have coaches participating in what we call short open programs, which are 2-day seminars. And we also have coaches participating in international study tours and coach exchanges where they visit other sports to get ideas from other sports. So coach development is a huge priority for us. Some of the pathway activities that we're working on, I'm really interested in building a pathways portal on the ACE website. The ACE website is also undergoing redevelopment, so this won't be launched until the new website is launched. But this will be your one-stop shop for informal coach development and ideas on athlete development, and a place where you can go and get information about all these pathway programs and activities that we've been working on. We're going to be uploading coaching resources. We're going to have some videos from some athletes. We'll have our athlete and our coach pathway framework documentation on there. We'll have our targets on there. We'll have all the outlines and the criteria for the NADP and what's going on in Next Wave. It'll all be on the Pathways portal. And we're also trying to improve our whole of sport collaboration. Just this morning we had a meeting with Marathon to see how we can improve the collaboration between sprint canoe and marathon. At National Championships we're meeting with canoe polo to see how we can improve the relationship between canoe sprint and polo. So whilst the Olympic disciplines are very much the priority of AC, we don't want to forget about the rest of sport as well. So we're working on some collaboration there too. Something that for me is really important, and I'm a scientist by background. My background is not in canoe sports. I have very little experience in paddling. My experience in paddling is limited to some tours. But my background is in athlete development, coach development, and I have a PhD in the development of sport expertise. So I'm really keen on monitoring and evaluation, constant evaluation to make sure we're on the right track and to update what we're doing if we start going off track a little bit. So some ways in which we can double check how we're going and monitor our success, and when we get to some milestones events, see how we're going. Benchmarking, profiling and performance planning is a huge component of this pathway exercise. So as I said, we're going to find out what the international standards are, where we need our athletes to be, and then what we need to do is take a snapshot of where our athletes are currently at, so we know what the gap is. Then we need to plan with our athletes how we're going to bridge that gap, and we're going to monitor and track their progress along the way. At the moment, high performance teams are very good at doing performance planning, and some coaches in some clubs are quite good at performance planning. What we want to do is, as a national body, for all these athletes that are on our radar in the junior national teams and even down to Olympic hopes, we want to do a little bit of benchmarking, profiling and performance planning so we can better monitor how athletes are tracking, who's progressing fast, who progress fast but then hit a bit of a plateau, where the gaps are, how we can individually tailor our support to make sure that we're meeting these performance plans. Obviously, race results are an easy indicator of how we're going in terms of time progressions and who's meeting standards. Similarly, club membership numbers, number of entrants in regattas, that sort of thing, those are really good indicators. And the final one I've got there is the NSO Pathway Health Check. This is, again, an instrument that's developed by the Australian Institute of Sport, in which I will be engaging with some stakeholders, state associations, executive officers, some coaches, some parents potentially. We're still having a look at how we're actually going to do this questionnaire, but it gets a snapshot of what we're currently doing in the pathway space. We look at each of the stages of athlete development and say, what are we doing here and how are we going and where do we need to improve? What are the major gaps in our pathway? And so this is a tool to document our progression as we're going through here. So we'll do the NSO Pathway Health Check in the next few months. And again, I'll make the results public so everyone's clear on where our pathway gaps and strengths are. And then we will do that. The idea of this questionnaire is to do it every 2 years to track our progress as an organisation. So I realise I've skimmed over everything very quickly. Our time is almost up as well. I've got a little bit of time for questions. But for now, until I have that pathway portal up and going, until I have some more specific information for you on these activities, please contact me. My email address is there. And keep your eye on the AC website, because I will start to increase my presence. Until we have that Pathways portal, I will every now and again post some notices and some information, much like you may have seen for the session today. It was last minute. You might have already been here. You might not have internet access, but I posted something on the AC website about this session today. I find digital communication really effective, particularly when we're talking about communicating with so many people in the pathway. So I very much value the face-to-face, and I try to do that as much as I can, and that's exactly why we're hiring these regional pathway coordinators, so that everyone does have a little bit more of a chance of face-to-face contact. But in the meantime, the web is a great source for us for all pathway activities. So I'm going to leave that slide up there so you can jot down my email address or take a photo if you like. And we've got a few minutes before 22, so if you have to race out to get athletes ready in boats, that's completely fine. I won't be offended. If you want to stick around, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Thank you very much for coming otherwise. Thank you. I should also say, actually, I am quite interested in running some